We have to ignore all the malarkey, ignore all the distraction, ignore the emails, and get behind Barack Obama. Straight up, folks. I'll be very blunt with you. So what I'd like to talk to you about is to thank you all for what you've been doing to fight what is, it's a strong word, but was basically been a pretty successful smear campaign these guys have been running. Some of the ads have been running. Look, I think most of you know me, at least those of you who are a little bit older know me. I've been hanging around with you a long, long time. And I hope no one wonders where my heart is. As Michael talked about my sons, well, you know, my first trip I ever took, and I know this is not a single issue organization, but the first trip I ever took abroad was to Israel. And I met back in those days with Prime Minister Golda Meir, which was one of the high points of my career. And she had sitting next to her, next to me in front of her desk, a guy named Rabin, who was her aide at the time. Since then, I've had a chance to meet with and get to know every Israeli prime minister, all 9. And along with many of you on this stage, and you, Mr. Ambassador, we fought that AWACS sale to the Saudis. We fought the sale of sophisticated weapons to the Arab states. I was the original co-sponsor of the Palestinian Anti-Terrorism Act, which banned any U.S. assistance to Hamas-led Palestinian Authority. And I, like many of you in this room, defended Israel's right to target terrorists who intend to strike at Israel. I've spoken out against anti-Semitism both in Europe and in Arab countries, and I've been very blunt about it. And why do I tell you all this? It's not to say I want to make an absolutely simple case and state a proposition to you. I've spent 35 years of my career dealing with issues related to Israel. My support for Israel begins in my stomach, goes to my heart, and ends up in my head. And I promise you, I guarantee you, I would not have joined Barack Obama's ticket as vice president where I had any doubt, even the slightest doubt, that he shares the same commitment to Israel that I share. I guarantee you. It's that simple. That is a fact. That is a fact. So, folks, I hope we're able to put to rest some of the stuff that's been going around, particularly in a Republican counterpart Jewish organization who actually went after me saying that I threatened to cut off aid to Israel, and things I never, ever, 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 ever did. But here's the point I want to make. That, Barack not only made that commitment to me, Barack has voted that commitment in his career in the United States Senate. Barack made that commitment when he visited Israel. Barack is on the record, and it's more than on the record. He understands. He gets it. And I know the NJDC isn't just about Israel, though. I know it's about leadership that reflects the values of the American Jewish community, and they are distinct and discernible. In this election, the distinction between the two tickets, I think, is clearer than it has been in any time in recent history. Remember 8 years ago, there was a man who said that he was running for president because he was different. He was not a typical Republican. He called himself a reformer. He admitted that his party had made mistakes and been wrong about a few things, and he promised. He promised to do what he'd done in Texas, quote, work with Democrats. He was going to bring honor and dignity to the White House and integrity, and he was going to build a compassionate society. You all know that candidate was George W. Bush. You all remember that. But we saw how that story has ended. 8 straight months of joblessness, 604,000 people losing their jobs through the month of August, with not a whole lot of positive prospects in sight. 46 million Americans without health insurance. Another 46 million wondering whether they can keep their health insurance. Foreclosures at a higher rate, and many of you are in the real estate business. Foreclosure at the highest rate any time since the Great Depression. Home values tumbling, average incomes down, the middle class under siege, everything going up from gas prices to grocery prices, and there doesn't seem to be anything that leads people to believe in the middle class that things are likely to change. I've been around a while. I've been there for 7 presidents. I don't recall any time when the middle class has been more apprehensive about the prospects for their children, more apprehensive about their own prospects. And we also, in the meantime, have a military that's been stretched so thin in 2 wars and multiple deployments that we only have 1 combat brigade in the entire United States military for contingencies other than where we are now engaged. I've not seen the nation as polarized as I've seen it and as exists right now, any time in my career. There's a culture in Washington where the very few and the very powerful have a seat at the table, and everybody else is on the menu. No one else is focused. 8 years later, we have another Republican candidate who's been my friend for 32 years. But he's the same, he's telling us the same thing. He's making the same commitments. This time, he says it will be different. It really will. He says this time, country's going to put before party, that there's going to be a change in tone, that we're going to reach across the aisle, there's going to change the Republican Party. I love how Republican nominees are always going to change the Republican Party. He's going to change how Washington works. Well, folks, we've seen that movie before. And you know from experience, the sequel is always worse than the original. So, folks, on all the important issues, and I mean this sincerely, John, my friend, is talking about change. I said this to John when I see him, and I say this to everybody, and I say this to the press. Name me one single substantive difference on a major policy issue John McCain has with President Bush. Doesn't make him a bad guy, but it sure doesn't make him an agent of change. Ladies and gentlemen, in my humble opinion, John McCain is profoundly out of touch with the dilemma that average Americans are facing. And nowhere has his failed philosophy been more exposed than during the current financial crisis. At 9 a.m. last Monday, John held a press conference where he said, and I quote, "The fundamentals of the economy are strong." At 11 a.m., John held a press conference saying we're in economic crisis. We Catholics call that an epiphany. The problem was only a political epiphany. It wasn't a substantive policy one. John didn't change any policy. He didn't back off of any of his prescriptions on the economy. He changed his rhetoric. If John actually realized what was going on, and he felt it in his gut as well as he articulated it in his voice, he would be forced to admit that the economic philosophy that he has been espousing, George Bush's philosophy, and it's not because it's George Bush, there's no difference in philosophy, is as bankrupt as Lehman Brothers is right now. It is literally bankrupt. If John cares so much now about, what he now calls, if you notice, isn't it fascinating? It's not Democrats referring to greed on Wall Street and throwing everybody under the bus. It's John McCain. John McCain. The ultimate populist argument is being used by John McCain. Well, if John McCain was so concerned about what he now characterizes, I think is an exaggeration, quite frankly, if John McCain, in fact, is so certain about that, where was John a week ago? Where was John a month ago? Where was John a year ago? Where was he 5 years ago? Well, I'll tell you where he was. He was bragging to those same Wall Street executives, and we can supply all the quotes and the sources of this. He was bragging up on Wall Street that he was going to, the very people he now calls greedy, about how he was going to shred the regulations that remained, what we call consumer protections that were built into the system. And when it comes to health care, the philosophy, the same philosophy John talked about in terms of the industry, John now wants to apply to the healthcare industry. I want to read you part of an article that John wrote that was out in this month's major magazine, an actuarial magazine of all things, but a very well-respected journal. I'm quoting. He says, "Opening up the healthcare market to vigorous nationwide competition, as we have done over the last decade in banking, will provide the choices of more innovative products, less burdened with the worst excesses of state regulation, like subprime mortgages." I'm serious. Think about this. John's talking about he's going to change. He's all of a sudden become the great regulator. And literally 1 week ago, John published this article. He wants to do for the insurance industry, the health insurance industry, what he did for banking. John wants your health care to be viewed in a very different way. It seems to me that's not a prescription for health care. It's a prescription for malpractice. You know, my father has a saying, had a saying, God love him, he's passed away. He'd say, don't tell me what you value, champ. Show me your budget. I will tell you what you value. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. Well, look at the budget that Barack and I are going to propose and have proposed, and you'll see, instead of increases in tax breaks for many of you who deserve, and by the way, the one thing I want to make clear is wealthy people are just as patriotic as poor folks. And I mean that's the sense. One of the disagreements I have with some in my party. You know, there's this sort of thing that, you know, if you do well, you're somehow not as patriotic as poor folks. Just as patriotic. We haven't asked much of anybody, though. We haven't asked much of anybody. And so we believe that what we should be doing now in this time of some crisis, where the middle class is hanging on by their fingernails, is we think we should direct the tax cuts that amount to, in our case, over $100 billion. We think those tax cuts should be directed to middle-class folks. 95% of the American public who draw a paycheck will get a tax cut under our proposal, literally. And no one but John McCain continues to misrepresent it. No one doubts it. No serious news organization, no serious econometric model. We think there should be tax cuts to help people pay for their gas and their groceries, to help them pay to keep their kid in college. For seniors making less than $50,000 a year, they should pay no taxes at all. They don't have to file. Why? It's about what we value. It's about what we value. We value seniors being able to stay in their home, maintain their independence, be in a position where they can, in fact, live out their lives the way they want to live it out. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to spend $15 billion. Some of you know people who benefit from this, but it's not needed. I come from the corporate state of Delaware, as they say. But the notion of deferred income and deferred profit with foreign investment, taking your company abroad, we shouldn't be encouraging people to take. We should be spending that $15 million in tax expenditures to pay people to keep their jobs here, to expand here. Ladies and gentlemen, on energy, the Exxon Mobils of the world, and by the way, they're not bad guys, but the Exxon Mobils of the world have made $600 billion in profit since 2001. As my mother would say, God love them. $600 billion. The only reason I make that point is they're the last folks that need another $4 billion a year in tax cuts to encourage them to drill. I asked the chairman of the board of Exxon. He was under oath. I asked him, do you need that additional tax cut? His answer was, somewhat begrudgingly, no, I don't. We now provide in the tax code $30 billion over 10 years in tax cuts for the oil industry, based upon how they benefit as other industries that need the tax cut. We give the same one to them, $30 billion. Just imagine if over the next 10 years, we had that $4 billion they want to add, which would be $40 billion, and the $30 billion you're getting. Imagine we put $70 billion into creating new green jobs and investing in alternative energy in a place where we can literally change the way in which we look at wind and solar. Imagine if we invest that money in giving tax breaks to the automobile industry if they finally begin to retool so they can make efficient cars. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to health care, we're not going to tax health care benefits you get from your employer, but that's what John proposes. John, and many of you are, most of you are really smart folks out here. You've been around. You didn't fall off, as my grandfather used to say, off the turnip wagon yesterday. But the fact is, you know what's been laying out there. There's a serious economic proposal that's been on the table for the past 40 years. And that is, there is no economic reason why you would not treat the average health insurance policy, which is worth $12,000 supplied by most employers, that's what it comes out to. Why not treat that as income? Just direct income. So somebody making 50 grand, add the average 12 to the 50, you're going to get taxed on 62. It's not a bad economic theory, it's just a dumb economic theory right now. And what it's going to do You know, John talks about, and Sarah Palin, or Governor Palin, talk about how we're going to raise taxes in the middle class. Let me tell you something factually. The only party going to raise taxes, and it will be over the next 3 years over $1 trillion on the middle class if we tax health care benefits. That's a direct tax, $1 trillion, $3.6 trillion over the next 10 years. So look, what should we be doing about health care? We're going to guarantee that all families can have the same health care policy I have. You say, Joe, how are you going to do that? Well, by the way, it's basic how we're going to do it. Anybody in a sliding scale can buy into the same program that the federal health insurance program is. Why would anybody want to do that? Because there are going to be 40 to 50 million people bargaining for the health care benefits in there. And we get to choose between 240 plans, among 240 plans. And the reason why it's such a good idea, our right-wing friends are going to have trouble calling it socialism. It's existed now for 17 million people, been working for a long, long time. So ladies and gentlemen, the point I want to make is there are solutions to these problems. They're not beyond our reach. They're not easy, but they're not beyond our reach. When Barack Obama asked me to be his running mate, I literally had 3 questions. The one question I want to speak to today is I asked him whether or not he really meant, did he really mean, was he really prepared to trust the American people? I know it sounds corny, but listen to it, because it really is the fundamental difference that exists, in my view, in politics today. I ask, are you really prepared to trust the American people enough that you are willing to insist on fundamental change? The fundamental changes you've been talking about. Because none of this stuff is going to be easy. Energy, healthcare, education, foreign policy. None of it's going to be easy. None. None. And these guys have just made the game a lot harder by the consequence of their economic policy on Wall Street. So folks, are we going to have the nerve? And my question was to Barack was, are you really going to go in your first term, challenge the American people? When he said yes, I said yes. And the reason for that is I really believe. I've been too long in the tooth, folks. I got a relatively good job being chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Presidents have to go through me to get things done. As vice president, they can go over me to get things done. So it meant a lot to me. I wanted to know. And the reason I believed him when he said yes is everything he's done in his campaign, everything he did as a state senator, everything he's done as a United States senator, everything about his life as I know it has confirmed to me that he'll not only demand the best of himself, but he'll demand the best of the country because he trusts it. He trusts the instinct. And I know some of you say, hey, Joe, wait a minute. We've had a bite out of that apple, but trusting the American people. When in our history, when at any moment of economic or foreign policy crisis have the American people ever let their country down? When? Look, folks, the next president is going to have an extraordinary problems he will face. And I say he because there's 2 candidates who are both men running for president. But I believe Barack Obama, I really believe Barack Obama will be that agent of change. These extraordinary challenges we face are real, but folks, and I'm not naive, I've been here for 7 presidents. The next president of the United States is going to have the most extraordinary opportunity since Franklin Roosevelt to change the direction of the world, not make it a utopia, literally get it back on track, and to lift this country up in a way we haven't been in a while. Folks, I ask you to just imagine. So I know when I talk to sophisticated audiences and I say things like this, they think, what's all of a sudden did he fall off the Turner truck? You know, this just sounds pretty naive stuff. But just imagine if we have a Supreme Court and the next president's going to get 1 to 3 appointees. Imagine if we have a Supreme Court that once again supports environmental protection, civil rights, women's rights, our civil rights. Just imagine. It will be there for 25 years. It will not last as long as our administration. It will far outlive it. And imagine if we don't. Imagine a country where we generate 20% of our energy, which is totally within, as my brother would say, our wheelhouse to be able to do. Generate 20% of our energy from renewable energy, like wind and solar and biofuels. Imagine a country where we invest in technologies that develop automobiles that don't pollute the environment. Imagine an administration that understands there's actually such a thing as global warming. Just imagine that. Imagine an energy policy that frees us from the tyranny that no audience understands more than you, the tyranny of the oligarchs of oil, creating this circumstance where the funding for the very people we worry about most come from. Imagine if we have an economy and an energy policy that creates 5 million new jobs by investing $1.5 billion a year in new technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a country that was once again respected around the world. Imagine a country that actually believes in science. Not a joke. That insists and invests once again in research and development and supports the healing and the hope that stem cell research and other major research initiatives offer. Folks, imagine a country that's willing to rebuild the infrastructure of this country, the roads, the sewers, the airports, the ports, the very thing that can keep businesses here because it's economically profitable to be in a circumstance where you can ship your product cheaper than you can now with a great deal more certainty. Imagine a country that's willing to invest in tomorrow's infrastructure, universal development and universal access to broadband, cars that run on hydrogen. Folks, imagine a country, literally, this is not, we don't have to make this up. Imagine a country where we only go to war when it's necessary. And imagine an administration that will responsibly end this war in Iraq. We will end this war. And so, folks, it's almost like people forget there's actually a war going on. A lot of families have children there, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. 4,160 dead, 30,324 wounded, over 14,000 critically wounded requiring medical health care for the rest of their lives, and their life expectancy is expected to exceed 35 years. And as the Nobel laureate Stiglitz said, the cost of the American taxpayer, if we keep our sacred commitment over that period of time, will be $600 billion just to care for that cadre of people. Ladies and gentlemen, a war that's costing us $10 billion a month, while the Iraqis sit on $80 billion of oil surplus. Imagine a president who won't wait until his 7th year in office to discover the need for American leadership in the Middle East peace process. A president who will call on the Arab states now to begin normalizing relationships with Israel, or there's consequences for their failure to do so. Imagine a country where everyone who is qualified can go to college. They can afford to go. Folks, where young people graduate from college and not graduate $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 in debt. We all talk about, I love it, our generation, we talk about working our way through college. Give me a break. I worked my way through college when tuition at the University of Delaware was $350 a semester. My sons graduated and my daughter graduated. Their average debt with my doing everything I possibly could with my salary as a senator. On average, they graduated $65,000 in debt. One 112 because he made a mistake of going to a law school that really isn't a law school, Yale. The others, but seriously, here they are with me doing everything I can, signing all the notes they could, borrowing all the money I could. And they're graduating $110,000, $85,000, and $42,000 in debt. Well, how do families do it that don't have my income and the Senate salary? Folks, imagine if we broaden the notion of national service to go beyond military service, getting millions of young Americans to serve not just in the military, but in our communities, in our schools, giving them tuition as long as they volunteer to do this. Folks, it's time America leads again, leading by the power of their example, and not just the example of our power. That was always the source of the great power of this country. So folks, look, I think Barack Obama, and I really believe this, I wouldn't have done this. I believe Barack Obama will be that bridge between what we imagine and what we can actually achieve. I think he'll appeal. I think he'll appeal as we've tried to and you have tried to. I think he'll appeal to our better angels, the better angels of Americans. The Obama-Biden administration is going to speak to our hopes, not to our fears. Americans always respond to their hopes because we have faith. As corny as it sounds, we have faith in the American people. We have faith in you. And by the way, this is not a blind faith. It's a faith based on the journey and the history of this country. It's a faith based on those generations that have gone before us and looking at what they've done in every time of crisis. Our greatest presidents, from Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Roosevelt to John Kennedy, they all challenged us to embrace change. And now, it seems to me it's our responsibility to meet that challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, my father used to have an expression. He said, "Champ, when you get knocked down, get up. Just get up." Well, millions of Americans have been knocked down. And I think it's time as Americans together, we get back up. Our people are too good. Our debt to our parents and our grandparents is too great. And our obligation to our children is too sacred. These are extraordinary times. This is an extraordinary election. The American people are ready. I'm ready. Barack Obama's ready. I think it's his time. I think it's our time. Look, we Catholics always are cribbing stuff from the Jewish faith. The 92nd Psalm we use as a communion hymn in our church. And it goes like this. It says, "And may he lift you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn and make the light to shine upon you." Folks, as corny as it sounds, it's within our capacity to lift us up, to let the light shine on corners of the country where people have been left behind. This is not rocket science. This is just simple, straightforward decency, calling on and appealing to the American people. Folks, I really do think the country's ready. I'm absolutely convinced of it. If I'm wrong, we're in deep trouble. But if I'm right, we're going to be part of a new day that we haven't seen in the last 75 years. Ladies and gentlemen, may God bless America and may protect our troops. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to be here with you today.